The phone call came on a Tuesday just as I was wrestling with my sociology textbook, wondering if I'd ever truly understand societal norms. Clara Dawson, a brisk voice asked. "This is Colonel Tom Parker's office. We received your application for a temporary assistant position. Can you be at RCA Studio B tomorrow at 9 a.m. for an interview?" My heart practically leaped out of my chest, did a quick cha-cha, and then tried to scramble back in RCA Studio B tomorrow. This wasn't just any studio. This was the studio, the one where legends were made in the application. I'd sent it on a whim. Seeing an ad for discreet, reliable assistance for a high-profile client. I'd never in a million years thought they'd call. I stammered out, yes, of course, and then spent the rest of the evening in a daze, trying on every outfit I owned, practicing professional-sounding phrases in the mirror, and generally freaking out, who was this high-profile client? I had a wild, hopeful guess, but it seemed too impossible to even whisper. The next morning I arrived at Studio B with butterflies, staging a full-scale riot in my stomach. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but inside you could feel the hum of history. The air felt thick with creativity, with echoes of music that had shaped a generation. A stern-looking woman led me into a small, sparsely furnished office. "Mr. Parker will be with you shortly," she said, her voice flat. I sat on the edge of a hard chair trying to appear calm, cool and collected. My hands were clammy. What if it was someone incredibly boring? What if it was someone so famous I'd make a fool of myself? Then the door opened, and a man walked in. He wasn't Colonel Parker, but someone else. He was tall, dressed impeccably, in a dark suit, his hair swept back in that iconic way, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. His eyes, though, were what really got me. They were a piercing blue, full of an almost electric energy, but also something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was him, it was really him. Elvis Presley. My mind went blank, every professional phrase I'd rehearsed evaporate. I was just Clara, a small town girl from Tennessee, sitting across from the king of rock and roll. He extended a hand. "Hi there, you must be Clara. I'm Elvis." His voice was a low rumble, warm and friendly, just like on the records. I managed to shake his hand, my palms still sweaty, and mumbled something like, "It's an honor, Mr. Presley," he chuckled. A soft, genuine sound. "Please call me Elvis or even E. If you like. Mr. Presley makes me feel like my daddy." He wasn't nearly as intimidating as I'd imagined. On stage, he was a force of nature, a whirlwind of charisma and raw energy. Here, sitting in a quiet office, he seemed approachable, almost gentle. He gestured for me to sit. Colonel Parker, a stout man with a cigar clamped in his mouth, joined us a moment later, his presence filling the room with an air of brisk business. He did most of the talking, rattling off a list of duties, organizing schedules, handling fan mail, discreetly running errands, keeping things running smoothly, while Elvis was busy with recording or touring. I tried to focus, nodding at all the right times, but my gaze kept drifting back to Elvis. He listened politely to Parker, occasionally interjecting with a quiet "yes, sir," or a thoughtful hum. He didn't crack jokes, didn't try to dominate the conversation. He just listened and watched. His eyes, those incredible blue eyes, seemed to take everything in. They darted around the room, taking in my nervous fidgeting the way I smoothed my skirt. There was a kindness in them, I thought, a quiet observation. When Parker finished, he turned to Elvis. "Well, E, what do you think? She seems smart enough and quiet." Elvis looked at me, a faint smile touching his lips. "She seems real nice, Colonel, and I reckon quiet is a good thing sometimes." He paused, then looked directly at me. "You think you can handle all this, Clara? It can get pretty wild." I took a deep breath, trying to channel every ounce of confidence I could muster. "Yes, Mr. Elvis, I do. I'm a fast learner. And I promise to be reliable." He nodded slowly, still holding my gaze. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no demand for adoration, just a searching, almost vulnerable look. It was a look I wouldn't have expected from the king. Colonel Parker cleared his throat. "All right, then you're hired, Clara. Start tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. Someone will meet you here and explain the ropes." I walked out of Studio B in a complete daze, the Nashville sun feeling brighter than ever. I had a job working for Elvis Presley, the king. It felt like a dream. But as I walked, one image stayed with me. Not the dazzling smile, not the confident posture, but that quiet, searching look in his blue eyes. It was a look that hinted at something deeper, something far more complex than the vibrant public persona I thought I knew. And for the first time, a flicker of curiosity sparked within me, a desire to understand the man behind the legend. My first day on the job was a whirlwind. I reported to Studio B, where a no-nonsense woman named Betty gave me a crash course in the Elvis operation. It involved mountains of fan mail, intricate travel schedules, endless phone calls, and a strict code of discretion. "You see nothing, you hear nothing, you say nothing," Betty drilled into me, "unless asked, and even then be vague." The first few weeks were a blur of learning, observing, and trying not to trip over my own feet in the presence of greatness. Most of my interaction with Elvis was indirect through phone calls or messages. He was always Mr. Presley to the staff, but he'd still insist on Elvis when he spoke to me. He was polite, appreciative, and always said, "Thank you," for even the smallest task. Then came the day of my first live show. It was a sold-out concert in Nashville, a hometown show. My role was to be backstage, ensuring everything was in place. Water, towels, guitar picks, and a steady supply of peanut butter and banana sandwiches. His particular craving, the energy backstage, was electric. Roadies hurried, musicians tuned, and the roar of the crowd seeped through the thick walls. I was a nervous wreck, but also exhilarated. I could hear the buzz of the audience, thousands of people waiting for their king. Finally, it was time. I watched from the wings as Elvis, in a dazzling sequined suit, burst onto the stage. The roar was deafening. He was pure magic. The gyrating hips, the powerful voice, the confident swagger. He was everything the public expected and more. He owned that stage, every inch of it. He bantered with the crowd, threw scars, and poured every ounce of his being into the performance. I was mesmerized, just like everyone else. The king, there was no doubt. After the final encore, as the crowd's cheers still echoed, he walked off stage. I expected him to be exhilarated, pumped up, still radiating that intense energy. But the moment his foot touched the concrete floor, but caged, a remarkable transformation occurred. The swagger seemed to drain from his body. His shoulders, which had been so broad and powerful on stage, seemed to slump slightly. His smile, which had been so wide and dazzling, softened into a faint, tired curve. He walked past the excited crew members, offering a quiet nod here and there. But he didn't stop the chat, didn't bask in the post-performance glow. He made his way directly to his dressing room, a small makeshift space filled with his stage clothes and a simple chair. I followed a few steps behind, carrying a tray with water and a sandwich. When he entered, he didn't immediately peel off his suit or call for anything. He just stood there for a moment, looking at his reflection in a cracked mirror. He didn't seem to be admiring himself. Instead, his gaze was contemplative, almost distant. He ran a hand through his damp hair, and a sigh escaped his lips. A quiet, weary sound. I hesitated. Unsure if I should interrupt, he turned and his eyes met mine in the mirror. For a split second, I saw it again, that quiet vulnerability, a hint of shyness that seemed utterly at odds with the rock and roll icon I'd just witnessed. His expression was almost bashful. "Oh, Clara," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Thanks for the water." He gestured vaguely towards the tray. I'd placed it on a small table. "Of course, Elvis. You were incredible out there." "Oh, well, I tried." He looked away, fiddling with the lapel of his sequined jacket. It was a subtle gesture, but it struck me. It was the same kind of nervous gesture I'd seen shy kids make in school. He wasn't preening. He seemed almost uncomfortable with the compliment. He walked over to the chair and sat down, carefully, as if the energy had been completely drained from him. He took a long sip of water, his eyes closing for a moment. He looked tired, yes, but also intensely proud. The man who had commanded thousands was now a quiet presence in a small room, almost shrinking into himself. "Anything else I can get you, Elvis?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He opened his eyes, those blue eyes, still holding a hint of that distant look. "No, thank you, Clara. Just a minute." He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. I nodded, understanding the unspoken request for solitude. I quietly left the dressing room, closing the door softly behind me. Outside, the buzz of the crew continued, but my mind was reeling. The transformation was so stark on stage, he was pure lightning. Off-stage moments, after the roar faded, he became a quiet, almost reserved individual. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was a fundamental shift in presence. King of rock and roll, the man who seemed fearless appeared in that brief moment to be shy. The thought surprised me, intrigued me, and made me wonder just how much of the real Elvis the world truly saw after the Nashville concert. My duties shifted. Elvis was spending more time at Graceland, working on new material and preparing for his next tour. This meant I was often at the mansion, organizing his study, handling correspondence, and sometimes even running errands to the local record store for obscure gospel albums. On one hand, it was a grand, iconic home, a symbol of immense success. On the other, it felt surprisingly intimate, a lived-in space filled with personal touches. There were rooms filled with awards and memorabilia, but also quiet corners with worn armchairs and stacks of books. It was during these days at Graceland that I truly began to observe Elvis in his natural habitat, away from the demanding spotlight of the stage or the structured environment of the studio. And the more I observed, the more I understood that my initial impression of his offstage shyness wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a core part of who he was. He rarely walked around the mansion with a swagger. Instead, he moved with a quiet grace, almost like a ghost, sometimes appearing unexpectedly in a room, startling me because I hadn't heard him approach. He preferred soft lighting, especially in the evenings, and often sat in quiet contemplation, listening to music or simply staring out the window. He wasn't antisocial, not by any means. He had friends and family around, members of his Memphis Mafia, who were loyal and always present. He was kind and generous with them, quick to laugh at a joke or share a meal. But even within his inner circle, there was a noticeable difference from his public persona. He was more of an observer, listening intently to conversations, offering a thoughtful comment here and there, rather than dominating the discourse. I noticed his quiet habits. He loved to read, often spending hours in his study or in the living room, surrounded by books. He wasn't loud or boisterous while reading. He was entirely absorbed, his brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally mumbling a phrase to himself. I'd often find him with a gospel album playing softly, sometimes even singing along under his breath, his voice rich and pure, but so much softer than his stage voice. One afternoon, I was organizing his extensive collection of records in the music room. It was a massive task, alphabetizing everything. I was humming along to a tune when I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Elvis standing in the doorway, a book in his hand, a small, almost sheepish smile on his face. "Sorry, Clara," he said softly. "Didn't mean to startle you." "No worries, Elvis." I replied, my sense of this impressive collection. He walked in, his gaze sweeping over the shelves. "Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?" He picked up an album, ran his thumb over the cover. Music's important, always has been. He didn't make small talk about the weather or his day. Instead, he started telling me in a quiet, almost reverent tone about the history of some of the blues and gospel artists in his collection, their struggles, their passions. He spoke with such genuine admiration and knowledge, not like a performer, but like a scholar or a devoted fan. I listened, fascinated. This was a side of him I hadn't imagined. Not the flashy entertainer, but a deeply thoughtful, intensely private man, with a profound respect for the roots of his music. As he spoke, he gestured with his hands, but his eyes, usually so direct on stage, often drifted away, looking at the albums or out the window, as if talking to himself, as much as to me. It was a quiet passion, not a flamboyant one. Before he left, he saw a stack of records. I was struggling to lift. Without a word, he reached down, picked them up effortlessly, and placed them where they needed to go. It was a simple, everyday act of kindness, but the way he did it, no fanfare, no grand gesture, just a quiet helpfulness, spoke volumes. "Thanks, Elvis," I said. He just nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Anytime, Clara." He left as quietly as he arrived, disappearing back into the depths of Graceland. I stood there, surrounded by records, feeling a growing sense of warmth. It wasn't just the thrill of working for a superstar anymore. It was the quiet revelation of the person beneath the persona. The more time I spent at Graceland, the more I realized that the king of rock and roll was in his private moments, a profoundly gentle, humble, and even shy man who found solace in quiet pursuits and genuine connections. I learned to anticipate Elvis's needs, to read the subtle cues of his moods. I also learned to appreciate the quiet. There were hours sometimes when the mansion was still, save for the hum of the air conditioning or the distant chatter of the kitchen staff. During these times, Elvis would often retreat to his study, and I'd be left with my tasks, feeling the peaceful calm of the house. One particularly warm afternoon, I was organizing a shelf of old movie scripts in his study. Elvis had been holed up there for hours, listening to music on low volume. I wasn't supposed to disturb him unless it was urgent, but my task required me to be in the room. I worked as quietly as possible, trying to be invisible. He was sitting in a large leather armchair, a pair of dark sunglasses resting on his nose, a thick book open on his lap. He seemed completely absorbed, his stillness a stark contrast to the dynamic performer. The only sound was the soft turning of a page, or the gentle melody from his record player. I was reaching for a script on the top shelf when a box of old photographs, precariously balanced, crashed to the floor with a muffled thud, scattering pictures everywhere. My heart leaped into my throat. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Elvis," I blurted, my face hot with embarrassment. "I'm such a klutz." He slowly lowered his book, then his sunglasses, revealing those incredibly blue eyes. They weren't annoyed or impatient. Instead, they held a flicker of amusement and something else, empathy. "No harm done, Clara," he said, his voice soft, not a hint of irritation. He slowly unfolded himself from the chair and knelt down beside me, starting to pick up the scattered photographs. I quickly joined him, mortified. "Let me get those." He just smiled faintly. "It's all right. Some of these I haven't seen in a while." Old photos of his parents, pictures from his army days, candid shots with friends. He didn't boast or brag. He spoke with a quiet nostalgia, sometimes a wistful sigh. Then he picked up a photograph of a small, nondescript building. It looked like an old church or a community hall. "This," he said, holding it out to me, "this is where I first sang in front of people. Really, the Tupelo Fairgrounds when I was 10. I took the photo, seeing a grainy image of a much younger Elvis, clearly nervous, standing beside a microphone. That's amazing, Elvis. I can't imagine how that must have felt." He looked away, staring at the photo in my hand as if seeing the memory. Terrifying. My legs were shaking. My voice felt like it was stuck in my throat. I just wanted to disappear. He chuckled, a self-deprecating sound. "Still do sometimes, before a big show. It's funny, ain't it? Being scared to do the very thing you love." His confession surprised me. The fearless king admitting to fear and wanting to disappear. It felt like a crack in the carefully constructed facade. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes," I offered gently. "No matter how good they are." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine connection in his eyes. "Maybe so. It's a strange thing. being in front of all those people like you're giving a part of yourself away every time. He paused, then picked up another photo. A black and white image of an old guitar. This was my first real guitar. My mama bought it for me. His voice softened even more, a deep affection in his tone. She always believed in me. When I was shy, she'd push me gently. Tell me to try, said I had a voice that could move mountains. We sat there for a while side by side on the floor, surrounded by old photographs. He didn't talk about fame or money or the wild parties. He spoke about his mama, about his roots, about the simple moments that had shaped him. He wasn't the public Elvis, but a boy from Tupelo. Grateful for his mother's love, still wrestling with the fear of inadequacy. Even after becoming a superstar, we didn't need grand conversation. There was a comfortable silence that settled between us, punctuated by his quiet anecdotes and my thoughtful listening. It wasn't an interview or a meeting or even a typical boss-employee exchange. It was just two people sharing quiet moments, finding common ground in the small, real things. As the afternoon light faded, casting long shadows across the study. Thanks for helping, Clara, he said, his voice quiet, and for listening. It was my pleasure, Elvis, I replied, meaning it. He gave me a rare, genuinely open smile. It wasn't the dazzling stage-ready grin, but a softer, more intimate one, acknowledging a shared moment. That afternoon, amidst scattered memories on the floor of Graceland, I felt a new connection forge, built not on words, but on shared silence and the unexpected revelation of a hidden vulnerability. The next few weeks brought a renewed intensity to Elvis's schedule. A new album was in the works, and there were demanding recording sessions at RCA. Then came the preparations for a series of high-profile TV appearances which involved long rehearsals, costume fittings, and endless meetings with producers and choreographers. The energy around Elvis shifted, becoming more frenetic, more demanding. I saw the toll it took on him. On stage, he was a master, effortlessly commanding attention. But off stage, the pressure seemed to press down on him, making him quieter, almost withdrawn. The easy smiles I'd sometimes seen at Graceland became rarer, replaced by a thoughtful, often weary expression. During recording sessions, he was a perfectionist. He would sing a line, then stop, listen intently to the playback and sigh. No, that's not it. It ain't got the feeling. He would try again and again, pushing his voice, searching for that elusive, emotional truth. He never lashed out in frustration, never yelled at the musicians or engineers. His frustration was internal, a quiet struggle written on his face. He'd rub his temples, pace the room, or just sit on a stool, head bowed, radiating a silent intensity. One particularly late night, the band had packed up and most of the studio crew had gone home. Only Elvis, his producer, and I remained. He'd been trying to nail a difficult ballad for hours, his voice growing hoarse. He sat slumped in a chair, his eyes closed, the microphone standing before him like a silent judge. Elvis, maybe we should call it a night, the producer suggested gently. You're tired. We can pick this up tomorrow. Elvis slowly opened his eyes. They looked haunted, shadowed by fatigue. Gotta be right. People expect it. They buy the records, they come to the shows. It's gotta be perfect. His voice was laced with a quiet desperation. Not a demand for perfection for ego's sake, but a deep-seated desire not to disappoint. It was the shyness again, I realized, the fear of not being good enough magnified by the immense platform he stood on. I watched him. He wasn't the king in that moment. He was a man burdened by the weight of expectation, by millions of adoring fans who looked to him for magic, and he felt every ounce of that responsibility. I walked over to the console where a thermos of hot tea had been sitting forgotten. I poured a cup and brought it to him. Here, Elvis, it's ginger tea. Good for your throat. He looked up at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a soft gratitude. Thanks, Claire. You're always thinking. He took the cup, his fingers brushing mine. They were surprisingly cold, He took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared into the teacup. "Sometimes," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "sometimes I feel like I'm wearing a costume even when I'm not on stage, like I have to be Elvis all the time for everyone, but I just want to be me sometimes. Just me." It wasn't a complaint, but a raw, unvarnished truth. The pressure of being Elvis Presley was immense, and it weighed on the quiet, shy man beneath the glitter and the fame. So I just stood there, letting my presence be a quiet support. After a long moment, he finished his tea, cleared his throat, and slowly stood up. "All right," he said, a renewed resolve in his eyes, but a tired one. "Let's try it again, one more time." He walked back to the microphone, his movements still a little heavy. But when the music started, something shifted. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. And this time, perhaps fueled by that raw, tired emotion, he found it. The feeling? Performance was flawless, imbued with a haunting beauty that resonated deep in my soul. When he finished, there was a collective sigh of relief from the producer. Elvis just nodded, didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. He simply walked out of the vocal booth, shed his headphones, and quietly said, "I think that'll do." As he gathered his things, he looked at me and offered a small, weary smile. "Thanks for the tea, Clara, and for being here." His eyes held a deeper appreciation now, a silent acknowledgement of the small act of kindness and the shared moment of vulnerability. I saw not just the king, but the deeply sensitive man who carried the world's expectations on his broad but sometimes heavy shoulders. The relentless schedule of album promotion and TV appearances continued to take its toll on Elvis. One morning he woke up with a bad fever and a hacking cough. Colonel Parker, the businessman, was furious. A canceled appearance meant lost money and disappointed fans. But Elvis was genuinely unwell, his usually vibrant eyes dull and listless. I was at Graceland that day preparing paperwork when a frantic call came through from one of the Memphis Mafia guys. "Elvis is really sick, Clara. Colonel's tearing his hair out. Can you come up to his room? He won't let anyone else near him but you." My heart squeezed. This was a deviation from my usual duties, but I didn't hesitate. I found him in his bedroom, the curtains drawn, the room dim. He was lying in bed, pale and flushed, surrounded by tissues. "Elvis?" I asked softly, approaching the bed. He opened his eyes, wincing against the light from the hallway. "Clara," he rasped, his voice rough. "Sorry, you gotta see me like this." He was clearly embarrassed. The king, blade low. His usual carefully cultivated image of strength and charisma was gone. He looked like any other sick person, miserable and wanting to hide. "Don't be silly," I said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Everyone gets sick. What do you need? Water? Medicine? A cold cloth?" He nodded weakly towards the nightstand. "Water, please, and maybe a story Mama used to read to me when I was sick." My heart melted. The request was so simple, so childlike. It was another glimpse into the private man, stripped bare of his defenses. I poured him a glass of water and handed him some medicine. Then I looked around the room, spotting a well-worn copy of the Bible on his nightstand. "Would you like me to read from here?" I asked, holding it up. He gave a small, weak nod. "Yeah, please." Something comforting. I opened to a random page and began to read, my voice soft and steady. I wasn't a professional reader, but I tried to infuse the words with warmth and calm. As I read, his breathing slowly evened out. He closed his eyes again, but this time it seemed more peaceful. After a while I paused, glancing at him. He was quiet, listening. "Clara," he whispered, his eyes still closed. Do you ever feel like you're not good enough, even when everyone tells you you are?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken weight. It wasn't about the current fever. It was about something much deeper. "Yes," I admitted, my own voice quiet. All the time it's easy to doubt yourself even when you're successful. Especially when you're successful, maybe because then the stakes are so much higher, he sighed. A long, weary sound. Yeah, it's like people expect so much. And I try, I really do. I give it everything I got, but sometimes I just want to hide, just disappear. A new, almost pleading note in his voice. Does that make me sound ungrateful? Makes you sound human. Everyone needs a break sometimes. Everyone needs to just be themselves away from expectations. It takes a lot of courage to do what you do, and it takes even more to admit that it's hard. He opened his eyes, and they were watery. Not just from the fever, but from an unspoken emotion. He looked at me, really looked at me with a raw honesty I hadn't seen before. The shyness was still there, but it was interwoven with a profound vulnerability. A plea for understanding. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. For seeing that, it was a quiet moment, but incredibly powerful. In that dim room, surrounded by the trappings of his fame, Elvis Presley, the king had peeled back another layer of his carefully constructed persona and revealed a simple, insecure man, struggling with the immense pronouncements or adoration. He simply wanted to be understood, seen for who he truly was beneath the glittering facade. And in that moment, I understood him more deeply than ever before. I continued to read, my heart aching slightly for the man who carried so much on his shoulders, but also swelling with a quiet respect for his raw honesty. Elvis's fever broke a few days later, and he slowly regained his strength. Quiet confession he'd made in his sickbed lingered between us, deepening the unspoken understanding. He didn't refer back to it directly, but his demeanor towards me subtly shifted. He was still the polite, appreciative boss, but there was a new ease, a quiet trust in his eyes. My job also evolved. I started taking on more responsibilities that revolved around protecting his private space and time. Colonel Parker and the management team were relentless, always pushing for more appearances, more records, more interviews. They saw Elvis as a product, a machine designed for maximum output. But I now saw him as a person susceptible to fatigue, emotional strain, and a desperate need for quiet. I became a sort of quiet gatekeeper. When reporters called relentlessly, I learned to offer vague answers or deflect them entirely. When overzealous fans managed to get past the initial security, I'd calmly but firmly redirect them, ensuring Elvis's peace wasn't disturbed. I'd filter requests, only passing along what was truly essential, trying to shield him from the constant barrage of demands. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes, Colonel Parker would bark at me for being too soft or not pushing enough. But I knew instinctively that protecting Elvis's quiet moments wasn't just a duty. It was a necessity for his well-being. One afternoon, a particularly persistent tabloid reporter somehow made it onto the Graceland property, trying to snap candid photos of Elvis relaxing by the pool. I spotted him lurking behind a hedge, his camera lens glinting. My heart leaped into my throat. Elvis was reading sunglasses on, completely unaware. Without thinking, I reacted. I walked directly over to the reporter, my voice firm despite my pounding heart. "Sir, you are trespassing. You need to leave the property immediately." The reporter, clearly surprised to be confronted by a young woman, tried to bluster. "I'm just doing my job." "The public has a right to see their idol." "And Mr. Presley has a right to his privacy," I countered, my voice not wavering. "You are on private property. If you do not leave, I will call the police." He grumbled, but sensing my resolve, he eventually backed down, muttering threats under his breath as he retreated. When I returned to the poolside, Elvis was still there, oblivious. I didn't want to alarm him, so I just quietly resumed my work. A few minutes later, he lowered his book. "You always make sure things are all right, don't you?" It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. A quiet understanding passed between us. He knew. He didn't need me to explain. He sensed my efforts to protect his fragile peace. Later that week, a large stack of fan mail arrived, filled with frantic requests for autographs, personal messages, even lockets of hair. It was sorting through it in his study when Elvis walked in. He stopped, looking at the mountain of letters. "It is," I agreed, picking up a letter from a young girl who simply wanted to tell him how much his music meant to her. "People really adore you, Elvis," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I'm grateful, truly. But sometimes it's a lot. All that attention." He looked away, fiddling with a pen on his desk. "It's like they don't see the me that's just sitting here, they see the king. And sometimes I just want to be the fella who sings for his mama, not for millions." His words, spoken so quietly, underscored the immense struggle he faced daily, the constant battle between the public persona and his private, shy self. I didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, I picked up a letter from a small boy who had drawn a stick figure picture of Elvis with a guitar. "This one's really sweet," I said, handing it to him. He took it, his gaze softening as he looked at the drawing. A genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't the dazzling stage smile, but a humble, heartfelt one. "He just wants to say hello," I continued, "not ask for anything. Just share a little piece of his day." Elvis looked at the drawing, then back at me. "Yeah," he murmured, "those are the ones." He put the drawing gently on his desk. In that moment, I understood my role, not just as an assistant, but as a silent guardian of his quiet world, a protector of the shy, vulnerable man who simply wanted to be seen, occasionally, as just himself, and I knew with certainty that it was a duty I would carry out with all my heart. With each passing week, the unspoken bond between Elvis and me grew stronger. He began to seek out my presence more deliberately, not for tasks, but for quiet companionship. It was never overtly stated, never demanded. It was just a subtle shift in his behavior, a quiet invitation. Sometimes he would come into the study while I was working, not to give instructions, but simply to sit in his armchair reading his own book, the only sound the rustle of pages and the soft hum of the air conditioning. We would often spend hours in comfortable silence, two people sharing a space, each absorbed in their own world, yet aware of the other's calming presence. Other times, especially in the evenings, he would ask me to play certain records for him, usually gospel or blues. He would close his eyes, listening intently, sometimes humming along under his breath. He never asked me to sing, never put me on the spot. He just wanted someone there, sharing the music, witnessing his private solace. It was during one of these evenings that he truly began to open up, sharing stories not just from his past, but also his deeper thoughts and feelings. He was listening to an old spiritual, his eyes closed. "You know, Clara," he said, his voice low and contemplative, "sometimes I feel like a lightning rod. All that energy, all that expectation just comes through me, and then I give it back, on stage. But when it's over, when I step off all that energy, it just drains away. And what's left is just me. And I gotta find a way to fill that space again, before the next time." His words painted a vivid picture of the immense emotional and spiritual cost of his performances. It wasn't just physical exertion. It was a profound emptying of self. "That sounds incredibly draining," I murmured. He nodded slowly. "It is, and sometimes it's lonely, even with all the people around, because they want the king. They don't want the fella who just wants to sit and listen to records." He looked at me, a flicker of that familiar shyness in his eyes, as if expecting me to dismiss his feelings. "But I do," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "I think the fella who sits and listens to records is just as interesting, if not more so, than the king on stage." A genuine soft smile touched his lips, a rare one that reached his eyes. It was a smile of relief, of being truly seen. "You really think so?" "I know so," I confirmed. "It takes a lot to be so vulnerable, Elvis, to share that part of yourself with the world. And it takes just as much, maybe more, to be quiet and genuine when no one's watching." He was quiet for a long moment, simply looking at me, then a slow nod. You know, Clara, sometimes it feels like you're the only one who truly understands that. Everyone else, they're always asking something of me, always wanting something, but you just let me be. It wasn't about fame or power or glamour. It was about human connection, about empathy and understanding. He began to share more about his inner struggles, his anxieties about his music, his desire to be taken seriously as an artist, his longing for a simpler life, his fear of losing himself in the whirlwind of fame. He spoke of the isolation, the constant scrutiny, and the difficulty of forming genuine relationships when everyone had an agenda. He wasn't complaining. He was confiding, sharing the burden that lay beneath the public image. I listened, truly listened, offering only quiet affirmations or gentle questions that encouraged him to continue. I didn't judge, didn't offer solutions. I simply held space for him, allowing him to be the shy, thoughtful, sometimes insecure man he truly was, away from the demanding gaze of the world. These quiet conversations, these shared silences, became the bedrock of our unique relationship. He trusted me with his vulnerabilities, with the parts of himself he rarely showed to anyone. And I, in turn, felt a deep honor in being witness to the true heart of Elvis Presley, a man far more complex and profoundly human than the world would ever know. It was a trust born of shared moments of quiet understanding, built brick by quiet brick in the hushed halls of Graceland. After weeks of recording and intense rehearsals, the time came for Elvis to embark on a new tour. The energy in Graceland shifted from quiet reflection to bustling preparation. Costumes were packed, instruments tuned, and the road crew swarmed the property. I was back in the thick of it, managing travel, logistics, handling last-minute requests, and ensuring Elvis had everything he needed for the grueling schedule ahead. It was a return to the public-facing side of my job, but now everything felt different. I saw him with new eyes, a deeper understanding, informing every interaction. The first stop was a massive arena. In a bustling city, the moment we arrived, the chaos began. Crowds of fans screamed his name, flashbulbs popped, and security guards formed a tight perimeter around him. Elvis, dressed in a sharp suit and dark glasses, moved through the throng with a practiced ease, offering waves and smiles. The picture of the confident superstar, but I could see the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight flicker in his eyes that only eyes seemed to notice. Backstage, the transformation was even more pronounced. He slipped into his elaborate stage costume, the sequins catching the light. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his eyes rimmed with a touch of kohl that amplified their piercing blue. He stood taller, his shoulders broader, his chin held higher. He was no longer the quiet man from Graceland. He was the king. I stood in the wings, just as I had on my very first concert. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a visceral wave of anticipation. The lights dimmed, the opening chords blasted through the speakers, and then Elvis exploded onto the stage, and he was magnificent. He wasn't just performing, he was embodying the music, becoming a conduit for the energy of thousands. His voice soared powerful and rich, filling every corner of the arena. His hips swayed, his legs moved with that signature electrifying rhythm. He commanded the stage with an effortless charisma, throwing scarves to screaming fans, winking at the audience. Every gesture polished and perfect, but this time I watched him with a different kind of understanding. I saw the intensity in his eyes, the deep breath he took before each song, the subtle clench of his jaw as he poured himself into a particularly demanding vocal. I saw the sheer effort it took, the immense will required to sustain that level of energy and charisma for hours. I no longer saw just the king. I saw the man. I saw the quiet, shy individual I knew, summoning every ounce of his being to become the icon, to fulfill the expectations of millions. It wasn't a facade exactly. It was a profound act of transformation, a channeling of his deepest self into a public performance. He gave everything, held nothing back, and then offstage he needed to replenish, to find the quiet solace that allowed him to be merely himself. During the show, at one point he glanced towards the wings and his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. In that brief moment, amidst the chaos and the adoration, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding. It was as if he was saying, "You see me? You see both of me." After the final encore, bathed in sweat and the last echoes of thunderous applause, he walked off stage. The transformation was just as striking as before. The shoulders slumped, the energy drained. He walked towards his dressing room, his steps heavy, his head bowed slightly. I was waiting with a towel and a glass of water. He took them from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. He didn't say much, just a soft, "Thanks, Clara." But his eyes, tired but deep, held a quiet gratitude. He went into the dressing room, and I closed the door behind him, giving him the solitude he needed. To transition from the roaring king back to the quiet man, I stood outside for a moment, listening to the fading cheers of the crowd. Then the silence. It was the other side of the coin, the balance to the explosive energy he released on stage. It was how he protected his core self, the private man, from being completely consumed by the demands of his public persona. He needed that quiet space, those moments of introspection, to gather himself, to be whole. Watching him perform, now knowing the man behind the music, deepened my appreciation for his artistry. It wasn't just talent. It was an act of profound generosity, of raw courage, to lay himself bare night after night, knowing the cost. And I was immensely privileged to witness both sides. The dazzling king who thrilled millions, and the humble, shy man who simply wanted to be seen and understood for who he truly was. The tour continued for several more weeks. A whirlwind of concerts, travel, and the constant hum of fame. My role remained consistent, managing the logistics, filtering the noise, and most importantly, guarding Elvis's quiet moments. We continued our shared silences, our brief, meaningful conversations. Our connection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet understanding, a knowing glance, a shared space of calm in the storm of his life. As the tour neared its end, I knew my temporary position would also be coming to a close. I hadn't thought much about it, too focused on the day-to-day. Now, the thought of leaving, of stepping away from this unique world, brought a pang of unexpected sadness. On the last night of the tour, after the final triumphant concert, Elvis was particularly subdued. The adrenaline of the performance had worn off, leaving him with a deep, quiet weariness. He sat in his dressing room, already changed into his regular clothes, staring into space. The room was quiet, save for the distant sounds of the crew dismantling the stage. I gathered the last of his personal items, packing them into his bag. I felt a lump in my throat. "Been quite a ride, hasn't it, Clara?" he said softly, without looking at me. "It has, Elvis," I replied, my voice a little shaky. "An incredible one." He finally turned, looking at me. His eyes were tired but warm, and you know. He paused, then added, "You've been a real friend, not just an assistant." My eyes welled up. "That means a lot, Elvis." He gave me a small, gentle smile. "It's the truth. You saw the real me, didn't you? When most folks just see the costume." "I tried," I whispered. "And I saw a kind, generous, and truly remarkable man. Elvis, not just a performer." He nodded slowly, a profound understanding passing between us. "That means more to me than any award, Clara, truly." He reached for a small leather-bound book on his table, a collection of poems. "Here," he said, extending it to me. "A little something to remember your time here." And for the quiet moments, I took the book, my fingers tracing the worn cover. It was a simple, thoughtful gift, perfectly attuned to the shared moments we'd had. "Thank you, Elvis. It's perfect." He stood up then, ready to leave the arena for the last time on this tour. As he walked towards the door, he paused and looked back at me. "You keep seeing the real thing, Clara. Don't let the noise make you forget what's truly important." Then he was gone, disappearing into the bustling corridor, surrounded by his entourage, the roar of his public waiting for him outside. My time with Elvis came to an official end a few days later back at Graceland. It wasn't a tearful goodbye, but a quiet, respectful farewell. Colonel Parker handed me my final paycheck, brisk and businesslike as ever, but before I left, I saw Elvis one last time. He was on the porch waving me off, a faint private smile on his lips. It was the shy smile, the one that meant, "I see you and I thank you." Life went on. I went back to school, finished my degree, and embarked on a different career path. But the experience of working for Elvis, of witnessing his surprising shyness, stayed with me. It wasn't just a celebrity encounter. It was a profound lesson in humanity. The world continued to see Elvis Presley as the larger-than-life king, and he was... But I carried a different image in my heart. The quiet man in the study, absorbed in a book. The weary artist pouring out his soul in the recording studio. The humble person confessing his insecurities in a dim bedroom. The gentle friend who found solace in shared silences. His shyness wasn't a weakness. It was a testament to his profound sensitivity, the depth of his spirit, and the immense courage it took for him to step into the blinding spotlight, night after night for the world. He was the king, yes, but he was also just Elvis, a man who, despite all the fame and adoration, remained surprisingly beautifully shy. And that to me was his most heartwarming legacy of all.